This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion.
Before I jump into my very well-known guest today, let me offer a reminder. If you go ahead and go to iTunes and write a review of this podcast, easy to find on iTunes, you can rip me to shreds, you can say something nice, but just go write a review. And if you rip me to shreds, at least give me, something that I can hang my hat on, something I can learn from. So if you really hate this podcast and you really feel the need to go rip the hell out of me on iTunes, at least be constructive feedback. Just, that's all I ask. And if you do, I will gladly send you a DVD and CD of Trend Following extras. Put a review up on iTunes, drop me an email, real simple, info at trendfollowing.com. Also, for the month of December, I'm having a special on my flagship product. Again, if you'd like more information on that special, and it's a discount, special pricing just for the month of December and limited to the first 25 people that respond. Again, send the request to my email address, info at trendfollowing.com. My guest today needs no introduction, but I'm going to give one. I think I first read about Jim Rogers in the Market Wizards books. That's where I became first aware of him and his career and his success. Former partner with George Soros back in the day at the Quantum Fund, been doing his own thing for decades now. I loved his Investment Biker book. That book absolutely, and I told him this, that book absolutely drove me to travel. And if you've not read Investment Biker, I don't know the exact year that it was written, 92, 93, 94. I don't care. Read that book. It's just fabulous. Now, it's not a trend following book, but it's a life book. It's an analysis book for how Jim Rogers makes his analysis. And damn, just what an adventure. I tell you what, the guy's got cojones. That is for sure. I first met Jim spring of 2008, if my memory holds. He appeared in my film. It was really cool. Great conversation. He had just moved to Singapore within the last 6 or 7 months, I believe. His little daughter, I think at the time was 5, was singing happy birthday to me in Mandarin Chinese, a little blonde haired girl. Just fabulous. And that's why he moved there. What a great story, right? To raise his family. Fast forward to just the last couple of weeks. I had to go back to Singapore. And since I'm lucky enough to have an email exchange from Jim dating back to 2008, I just responded to our 2008 exchange and said, "Hey, Jim, my podcast is doing okay. People are listening. Would you like to appear?" He said, "Sure." I said, "I'm going to be in Singapore." He said, "Stop by my house." I did. Now, I don't know how the audio is going to turn out. I pray my guy, Steve, my audio engineer, I pray that he can clean this sucker up. But, Jim is a character, and we did the interview outside in his courtyard. There was a fountain nearby. He was on his exercise bike. I was sitting on his other exercise bike. And he was kind enough, as he said, "Michael, when you're ready to start the interview, I'll stop pedaling." So the audio is going to have a little bit of something, but it's very clear. And again, Jim just gives these perspectives. It's not as much about the great investment idea today. It's more about geopolitics, how he sees the world, and the advantages of travel. Just a great conversation. I always love connecting with Jim, and I hope he will grant me an interview once a year for the rest of my life. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jim Rogers.
Jim, last year had a chance to come to Asia not for the first time, but came over on a speaking tour for 4 months. I don't know how many cities I was in, around 10 countries. And one of the things that struck me the most was getting on the bullet train from Shanghai to Beijing. And as I'm on that bullet train, which is about the same distance from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta, I'm thinking to myself, how many Americans am I going to have a chance in my lifetime to share this experience with? Is it ever going to be possible to get the average American to understand what's going on the ground in China?
No.
Impossible?
I assure you, the average American still can't find China on a map and doesn't know why he needs to, doesn't know why he should care where China is or what's happening in China. The average American can't find California on a map. All they know is that something happened there with O.J. Simpson. You know, no, I'm afraid it's a lost cause, and I'm not sure why. I think partly because, you know, of our geography and our history, we haven't really needed to know about the rest of the world, and we haven't known about the rest of the world. It would be interesting to know if other nationalities have the same, but in Europe, of course, they know where each other is, but they've always been shooting each other, so they know where the other countries are. But I wonder if the same would be true of South Americans or Asians or anybody else. But I don't think it's ever going to, no, it's not going to happen. Not in your lifetime or mine.
So it takes a guy like you or a guy like me just to say, hey, I've been in America my whole life. I'm just going to go and I'm going to do it and I'm going to experience it. It takes some kind of unusual, odd spirit to just leave it all and go and see.
Well, Michael, throughout history, that's been the case. People who leave home are either nuts, like me, or else they're people who have vision, ambition, energy, brave. To pack up and leave home, even to pack up and go from Iowa to California takes a certain amount of initiative, but to pack up and go from Iowa to Germany or Germany to Argentina, that takes a huge amount of bravery, guts, ambition, every initiative. It's not easy. It's very, very hard. Even if you have money and education and everything else, it's still not easy. So, no, I'm afraid not many people do it. I mean, obviously history is full of people who have done it, but not the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people stay home. Or if they leave home, they go from Iowa to California or something similar. And I'm afraid it's human nature more than anything else. But I will say, just to wrap up, history does show that the people who do move are the kind of people that you want in your country. America became a great country because it had a lot of immigrants with new energy, new ideas. They were brave, they were ambitious, they had courage. Those are the people that you want coming to your country, at least the people that I want coming to my country, if I have a country, because those are the people who are going to build the future.
Let me ask the big, broad question before I get into some specifics and kind of a personal question. So the last time I see you in spring of 2008 in Singapore, not but probably less than a year, less than 2 years after you announced you were coming here. Looks like you've settled in pretty good. Looks like you've become a Singaporean to some degree. You're still an American guy, but...
Well, we're very happy here. Singapore is a very easy place to live. Everything works in Singapore, has great education, it has great health care. I mean, it's a remarkable success story over the past 40 or 50 years. So we're very pleased to be here. I loved New York a great deal, but I do remember that New York was not an easy place to live, as exciting and wonderful as it was. And when I go back, I realize it's not an easy place to live. So we're very pleased to be here in Singapore. At times, I thought I would certainly regret. In fact, I almost backed out of selling my house in New York. I was having such seller's remorse. But, boy, am I glad I did sell the house. I am very glad I moved here.
So, listen, getting back to China, a couple other issues I want to dig apart there. You're still doing quite a bit of travel and speaking across China.
Yes. No, for some reason, people keep inviting me to China. And I like China a great deal. I like a lot of places a great deal, so I usually accept.
Before I want to talk about the infrastructure a little bit more. What I've seen of the infrastructure is just flat out amazing. I mean, Shanghai in itself, like last year, I think I was in Shanghai's tallest tower, and it was being dwarfed by the one that was being built next to it. That enthusiasm, that spirit, and I've seen some people in America say, "Oh, Mike, that's not fair for you to become infatuated with China because we built out all of our new a long time ago, and now they're just catching up." But aren't they catching up with something that's on steroids?
Yes. Now, I can understand the argument that JFK. When I go to JFK, I think to myself, I hate to fly into JFK. It's a third world airport, and you get in a third world taxi, and you go on a third world highway, and when you get to a hotel, even a 5-star hotel, it's third world, 5-star. Now, I can make the case that, that's because New York was built 100 years ago, and JFK was built 60 years ago. And now the Shanghai airport is mind-boggling, or Hong Kong, or Tokyo. But that's because one can make the case because they were new and built late and learned from America and other people. I'm not sure I buy that. Because one could have rebuilt many things, including highways in the States, and we haven't. It is a nightmare for most people, including me as an American, to go to JFK and LAX. Oh my gosh, Los Angeles Airport. I dread going to that airport. One could make the case that these places could have been rebuilt. Amsterdam is rebuilt. Frankfurt's rebuilt. So I don't really buy the argument that, Mike, you're wrong because you're falling for the wrong facts. You're not.
Is it because, as Americans, it's not necessarily is it are we bad for thinking this way, but being geographically isolated, we don't see the competition?
No, that's part of the situation with the U.S. is because of our geography, our location, and because of our history. We haven't had to see the competition. We haven't had to see the rest of the world. Less than fewer than a third of Americans have passports, and don't see any reason they should get a passport. Fewer than a third of American congressmen, when they're elected to Congress, have never been abroad. They get passports pretty quickly, so they can get in on the boondoggles as soon as they get elected. But no, I don't think that would be the case of Germany or the UK or many other countries that they don't have passports or that they haven't traveled. Certainly China, I'm sure that's the case, the Asian countries, but that's because of their history. They were at war, they suffered with communism and lots of other things. Until a few years ago, it was almost impossible for a Chinese citizen to get a passport, much less to take money out of the country. Now it's very, very easy, and so they're starting to travel in masses. In fact, one of the great growth businesses of our time is going to be the rise of Chinese tourism. They want to see their own country. They want to see the rest of the world. They have not been able to for a few hundred years for a variety of reasons. And Mike, there are 300 million of them. It's going to be staggering. I remember when I was living in New York in the 80s, I remember suddenly we saw all these Japanese, and everybody said, where do these Japanese come from? There are 125 million Japanese. There are 300 million Chinese. So you can imagine how the Chinese tourism, when it really takes off, is going to overwhelm many, many things.
Let me throw this out at you. So if I was playing word association with, and I'm not trying to be like, I just want this to be more of an educational conversation. This isn't me trying to be in Asia and talking bad about America or anything like that. I'm just trying to get across, because you've got some great perspectives. But if I was to play word association with the average American, and I was to say, for example, Vietnam, and then say China, the average American is going to say the word war for Vietnam, and then communism for Vietnam and China, and then they're going to think they just made a pronouncement that actually means something and counts for anything. I can tell you in the last year and a half, not one Vietnamese person has said the word war to me. 50% of them are under the age of 30. They weren't alive. So what do you, if you're trying to get around that cocktail conversation, polite cocktail conversation, where somebody gives you the immediate retort of war or communist, like they how do you even begin to break that apart? Or do you just get an immediate headache and say, I can't win?
Well, first of all, I wonder if you said Vietnam to Americans under 40, if they would say war. I don't know. I don't know. I wonder if I know that if you said Tiananmen Square to Americans under 30, they would have no idea what you were talking about. You and I are showing our age by remembering things like this. We are products of our ages, obviously. I think if you said the word communist to most people under 30, they would have no clue what you're talking about. And, the only countries that call themselves communist anymore are Cuba with 9 million people, North Korea with 20 million people. So communism is not, well, I guess China still calls itself communist. I take that back. The Chinese do call themselves communists, but they're the best capitalists in the world, or among the best capitalists in the world right now. Don't know that even they would talk about communism very much. The world has changed. The world is always changing very dramatically. If you go back to pick any year in history, and then you see what everybody thought in, say, 1920, and then you looked at the world 15 years later, you would see that everything that everybody thought in 1920 was no longer accurate in 1935. But pick any year, 1935, 1950, it doesn't matter what year you pick, you see that the world 15 years later is always dramatically different from the perceived wisdom of any particular year you want to pick. And that's continuing to happen. 15 years ago, I'm not sure what anybody would have said about Saigon. Let's see, 1999, whatever they would have said about Vietnam. Boy, it's changed since 1999. Everything has changed a lot since then. And back to our problem, if you read the American press or watch American television, you have very little clue that there isn't anything else in the world. I mean, they'd rather talk about O.J. Simpson than just about anything in the world. I can remember when I was on one of my trips around the world, whenever we would get to a hotel, we would turn on the television, and American television was consumed with O.J. Simpson, even though the rest of the world had enormous things going on in those days, but nobody in America seemed to know or care. They were all so consumed with O.J. Simpson. But I mean, pick any other year you want. Pick this year. I'm sure that whatever they're consumed with, it doesn't have much relevance to the rest of the world.
So China's at 160 cities with a population of over 1 million.
Yeah, no, I know. It's staggering. That cities with 5 million people I never heard of. You never heard of. I know. It keeps happening to me. I was in a city a month ago. I'd never heard of. It had over 5 million people. I was stunned. It's always happening.
Is it just a brand new feel, just brand new cities?
Oh, yeah. They all have great highways, buildings. Everything is new. Now, again, back to your early comment, that may be because they've only, emerged here in the last 30 years. So, of course, everything is new. There may have been a time when New York, let's see, in 1910, New York may have looked like that. Grand Central Station may have been the most exciting railroad station in the world. Perhaps it was. It's certainly not now. But so it may be just a question of the times, and that China is developed now. Korea, Vietnam, everything is developing now, whereas America developed 100 years ago. But the counter-argument to that is, why didn't America stay current? Why didn't they keep things modern and up to date?
I always hear in the news, American news, the threat of China, the military threat of China. And I say to myself, well, a big country like that, a big superpower like that, why would they not want to have a military? That's to be expected. And when I'm there, I'm thinking to myself, should we really be too worried about a country that has this many KFCs? I don't think they're launching an attack on the shores of California anytime soon.
No. The Chinese, I've been going there for 30 years. I first went in 1984. And first you look at their history. They have rarely, if ever, been at war with any of their neighbors. Rarely. You look at Europe, and they're always at war with their neighbors, or even America. We're always at war with somebody. China has very, very rarely been at war externally. They've had internal revolutions where they've slaughtered each other, but rarely have they gone to war with other people. And they always love Americans. They love what America does and stands for, at least in their own image, I'm afraid that all of this animosity to China comes from Washington more than any place else. And I'm always sort of surprised. I'm actually stunned, because America and China together should just be fabulous partners. But unfortunately, for some reason, there's this animosity, whether it's, I don't know where it comes from, but there's this animosity to China. And I've never seen that animosity in China towards America. I'm starting to see it now. But we read about it now in the press, just because America's always slapping the Chinese in the face.
Yeah, because I mean, last year when I was there, and I was treated very nicely as a speaker at several events in Beijing and Shanghai, and I mean, I couldn't have found any more of a welcoming people. And I'm, my name is known a little bit, but not much. But they were extremely welcoming and like, come in and, I mean, I was sat down with China Asset Management, the largest mutual fund, and these guys just wanted to get into the nitty-gritty, and they would hide that they had perfect English until the end. When it was Q&A, they maybe do the whole translator thing, and then they spring it on and be like, oh yeah, we got perfect English.
Yeah, they all went to Wharton or some such place. Oh, I know. But I have yet to find great animosity in China towards America, and it's only been, America's doing these things like putting military forces all around them. Well, you'd start worrying too if all of a sudden America, or a nation, was pivoting to your part of the world and sending troops and ships and everything else there. You don't see any Chinese ships in the Caribbean. You don't see any Chinese airplanes patrolling the Pacific coast.
Nothing circling around Manhattan close by.
Yeah. You see all sorts of American arms and soldiers surrounding China, which is, and I don't see any reason for it. We may provoke something, but I certainly don't see any reason for it now. Just to that point, as I think about it, and I have thought about it, here's a country which has been working hard and rising and saving and investing and working 24 hours a day, and they become successful, and they get attacked for being successful and resented, and people say bad things about them. My gosh, that's what you're supposed to do. I guess that's human nature, that if a family works hard and struggles and does very well, there are always people who are resentful of them, or a company, or a country, much less a country. But I mean, here these Chinese were sitting around for the past 40 years, just working their heads off, saving and investing for the future, and now they're getting condemned for doing that. But that's what you and I would say they're supposed to do. I'm sure there were many people who condemned America 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when we were doing the same thing, but people forget.
Let me shift on you to current Fed policy in America. I don't really understand current Fed policy in America, except interest income has been eliminated and stocks are at all-time high. Should I be worried about anything, Jim?
You should be worried about the fact that they don't understand policy either. They have, many of the governors have let slip at times, but they don't know how this is going to work. This is an experiment, as much as anything else. This has never been done before, not by any reputable government. We've had governments print money, but their currency's gone down the tube, and ours may too before it's over. Now, I'm worried about it. I don't know if you should be worried or not, but I'm certainly worried about it, because I know they don't know what they're doing. And this is all this is going to end badly for all of us. Because you cannot just continue to print money. Eventually you run out of trees, if nothing else. And that's what's going to happen in this case.
Then the tricky part on this is trying to lay any kind of a prediction or a timing on something like that, right?
Well, of course it is. But on the other hand, we've had a bull market in the U.S. for 6 years now. And most bull markets don't last this long, much less longer. So I think it's fairly safe to say it may go on for another year or two. But will it last 10 years? Will it last till 2018? In my view, it's very, very highly unlikely. So I would certainly say 2016. I'm not predicting. I'm just throwing numbers out of the air. It's not going to last that much longer. It cannot, based on historic, unless the world has changed. And unless it is different this time, which are terribly dangerous words, it's not going to last much more than a year or two more. I have no idea what will end it, what will probably end it in the end is one of two things. Either the central banks around the world are going to come to their senses, very unlikely, or two, the rest of us are just going to say, we're not going to take this garbage anymore. We don't want this garbage paper. And we're going to start our own correction, our own consolidation, our own decline. And that's more likely. What may well happen is we may have a bubble or two develop. America, for instance, things are setting themselves up for a bubble, a lot of money printing, the oil prices are down, there are things that are going to make the economy strong. That could turn into a bubble a lot of places, Japan, many places. And if that happens, all bubbles come to an end eventually, not because central bankers come to their senses, but because investors populations come to their senses. So it's more likely to happen that way. You and I and everybody listening to this program, not me, but you and I and everybody listening to this program is going to come to their senses and say, we're not going to do this anymore. My problem is I have too much experience. You know, what you need at a time like this is to be 26 years old, because then you don't know that this is strange and that this cannot last, and that if the market does turn into a bubble, you won't think it's a bubble. You'll think it's normal. You'll think that this is the way the world always is, and you'll think, oh my gosh, am I so smart? Every time I buy a stock, it goes up. You won't know that it's not you. You're living in perilous or peculiar times. But unfortunately, fortunately, I'm not 26 years old.
I would think that countries that have a little more of that, and America's gone through phases, but let's say there's a little more can-do spirit in some of the Asian countries that we've been talking about. If there becomes a decline that really affects people again, like 2000 or 2008, 2009, it seems like that perhaps China would dig out of it better than, I mean, look, if the baby boomers are faced with a stock market that one day starts to look like the Nikkei, I don't think they're going to start working harder. I think it's going to become more like, what can the government do for me now? It's just, it doesn't seem like it seems like that if that bubble that you're speaking of grows and pops, that the ending and the aftermath in America might be far less pretty than other places.
No, it will be. I hate to say it, but I'm not the first person to figure out that half of Americans don't pay taxes. Half of Americans, survive or live on government income one way or the other. So no. And you see what happened the last time the bubble popped. All those banks called up Washington and said, "Save me, save me." It's the end of Western civilization. And lo and behold, they saved them. They bailed them all out so they could keep their Lamborghinis and keep their, country houses at your expense and mine. We paid for all of that. The next time it's going to be worse, because the next crisis is going to be much, much worse. We had a problem in 2002, one or two. Then 2008 was much worse because the debt was so much higher. The next one's going to be much, much worse because the debt, not just but the debt in the U.S. is staggering amounts higher, but all over the world, the debt has gone through the roof. So the next crisis is going to be much worse than the last one or two. So you should be worried and you should be prepared.
Let me shift into a more fun conversation, slightly personal for you. So the last time I saw you, we were filming some really cool video, and near the end of the conversation, your daughter came out, and now she's obviously going to have six years older, but she was singing behind you, "Happy Birthday to Me" in Mandarin. So how, you've talked about how important language skills are, and I'd love for you to reiterate that. But why don't you talk about what you have seen? I mean, you can imagine what language skills are going to be like, but when you see your own flesh and blood speaking two languages in an Asian country, I mean, how has that affected you?
Well, that's why I came here. I came here because I knew I couldn't ensure that my children would speak perfect Mandarin living in New York, because I heard so many stories about how many people have tried to make sure that children speak a second language, but when they become 9 or 10 years old, they just refuse. So we came here to ensure that my children know perfect Mandarin and know Asia, because in their lifetimes, Asia is going to be the most important part of the world, and Mandarin will be the most important language. So to me, that's why I came here. It is working, yes. I now have 2 children. They both speak fluent Mandarin like natives. But their older daughter, the one you met, recently won the nationwide Mandarin speaking contest in Singapore. Now, if I went to a movie and saw a blue-eyed blonde kid speaking the most perfect Mandarin in a Chinese nation, I would walk out. I'd say, who are they kidding? This is absurd. She won it last year, and she won it this year too. So at least that part of my goal, that part of my plan has been well executed. In her lifetime, if she can speak fluent Mandarin and fluent English, which they both can, native like natives, it's going to be a huge leg up. Mike, it's not going to make them successful, but at least if they wind up working in Chinese restaurants, they're going to be the maitre d's. They're not going to be the dishwashers. It's a big leg up.
Let me ask you just a few things to sign off here. Just some ideas for people. Big picture, macro, talking about countries for a second, in ways that people can participate in big, long-term bets from your perspective. What's your view on Myanmar these days?
Oh, I'm extremely bullish on Myanmar. Myanmar is, where China was in, say, where China was in 1982, 1983. It's just started opening up a few years ago. Got vast natural resources, vast human resources. It's right between India, China, and Thailand. It's in a very good neighborhood. No, I'm very excited about the future of Myanmar.
But Vietnam?
Vietnam, the same thing. It's a country with, 80 million people, whatever. It's got very interesting neighbors. They have a strong work ethic. They work hard. They save their money. I guess they still call themselves communists, but I don't think if you walked up to somebody on the street in Vietnam and said, "Are you a communist?" probably wouldn't know what you were talking about, at least a young person. No, they're at the right place at the right time.
I like to tell people also, I said the population of Indonesia and Vietnam combined is that of America.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah.
What do you think about Indonesia?
Well, I've been skeptical of Indonesia most of my life because it's not really a country. It's an amalgamation of something that the Dutch sort of pushed together. It's 15,000 islands with different religions, languages, ethnic groups, etc. But the more I've come to know about Indonesia, the more optimistic I am. The management, of course, has gotten much better from the days when I first stumbled into Indonesia. And they've got lots of natural resources, and they're much better managed now than they were before.
What do you think about a place that was off the beaten track quite a bit, but is starting to become popular with tourists, which is Cambodia? I've only been to Siem Reap, but I could feel the cowboy spirit there.
Well, yes, Cambodia has a lot going for it. There are only 14 million people, so it gets harder and harder for me to get wildly excited about Cambodia. But yes, it's got huge natural resources, great agricultural potential, some tourist potential. I mean, Siem Reap is a great place to go, but yeah, it's got a good future. But you're getting lower and lower on the list as far as I'm concerned.
Let me do the last one. We've already talked about China. I'm gonna give you the last one, and we'll finish up. Thailand.
If you can get your timing right, Thailand's had a military coup every 6 or 7 years for decades. So if you can get your timing right, if you're smart enough to buy during a coup when everybody's in panic, you'll probably do very well. They got a lot of smart people. They got a lot of natural resources. They're in a very good neighborhood. They do have a larger population. Again, it's not high on my list. I'm not sure why. One that I am very excited about is North Korea. I mean, if I could put all of my money into North Korea, I would. I cannot because I'm an American, obviously. We citizens of the land of the free are not nearly as free as everybody else, but it is. North Korea today is where China was in 1980, where Myanmar was in 2010. I mean, it is wildly exciting what's happening in North Korea as it opens and changes.
What makes you, this is my last question, what makes you wake up each day? What makes you excited to go do it each day? What makes you different than some of your friends and whatnot? What's your drive? What makes you go?
I got nothing else to do, I guess.
Oh, come on.
I don't have a television, so I got to do something.
Hold on, you're connected. We're looking right now on your bike right now with your laptop and your workout clothes. Come on.
Well, that's true. I do have a computer. Well, I'm very excited and keen. I'm interested in the world. I always have been. So I don't think I could tell you anything about the National Basketball Association, but I could tell you lots about the world, because that's my passion. Other people's passion is the NBA or things like that. My passion is the world, and I'm very keen on knowing about the world, seeing the world, experiencing the world, and obviously investing in the world.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
One other thing that's my passion, I now have two little children, two little girls. I never wanted to have children. I thought children were a horrible, horrible waste of time, energy, money. I really felt sorry for all those poor saps who had children, and I was never going to do anything so foolish. Well, I want you to know I was totally wrong. I was 100% wrong. So the biggest passion for me now are these two little girls, and I cannot get enough of them. I came to all this late, so I want to get as much as I can. And I don't know if it's correct or not, but I think, at least in some ways, it's good that I came to all this late, because I do have experience, knowledge, a certain amount of money and time that I would not have had if I were 25 years old when I did all this. Very, very pleased that I have these little girls, and I spend as much of my time and energy on them as I can. So that's the passion.
Not a bad passion.
No, it's a lot of fun.
Thanks, sir.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.